You just moved $100 from checking into a savings account you almost forgot existed. That's it. $100. Not enough to cover a flat tire and a tow truck in the same week. Not enough to make a dent in rent. Honestly, not enough to impress anyone, including yourself. And yet something in your chest loosens just slightly. You check the balance again the next morning like it might have grown legs and walked away overnight. It didn't. It's just sitting there, $100. Here's what nobody tells you about that moment. That $100 is going to do more for your financial future than the first 10,000 you eventually save. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds backwards, maybe even a little insulting if you've been grinding toward five figures for years. But stick with me because the math and the psychology both back this up, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. My name is Ash, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people build wealth almost by accident, while others stay stuck no matter how much they earn. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand the actual mechanics behind this stuff, instead of just hoping your bank account magically fixes itself, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it changes how you see your own first $100. Let's talk about why we're all obsessed with the big numbers in the first place. Everybody wants to talk about the $10,000 milestone or the $20,000 turning point or the day you finally see six figures sitting in an account. Those numbers feel real. They feel like they matter. Meanwhile, $100 feels like a rounding error, like something you'd find in the couch cushions of a genuinely wealthy person. But here's the thing, almost nobody says out loud every single person who ever reached $10,000 in savings had to pass through $100 first. There is no version of financial security that skips that step. And the way you handle that first $100 predicts with uncomfortable accuracy whether you'll ever see the 10,000 at all. Think about it like learning to swim. Nobody starts in the deep end. You start in water shallow enough to stand in, and you figure out how to float before anyone asks you to cross a lake. The first $100 is the shallow end. It's low stakes, almost laughably low stakes, and that's exactly why it matters so much. It's the only moment in your entire financial life where you get to practice the skill of saving without the pressure of a life-changing amount hanging over your head. Now, here's where the actual psychology comes in, and this is the part that surprised me when I first looked into it. Researchers who study habit formation will tell you that the size of an action barely matters when you're building a new identity. What matters is the repetition and the emotional charge attached to it. When you save your first $100, your brain isn't calculating future value or compound interest. It's asking a much simpler, much older question. Am I someone who does this or not? And the answer it gives itself in that moment becomes the foundation for every financial decision that follows. This is different from what happens once you're already deep into the $10,000 climb. By that point, you're not really deciding whether you're a saver anymore. You already decided that probably months or years earlier, back when the amount was tiny and the stakes were low. The $10,000 milestone is mostly just math executing on a decision you already made. The $100 milestone is where the decision itself gets made. Let's get concrete about what that decision actually looks like in a normal week. Say you've got 20 extra dollars after covering your bills. Most people, and I mean most, will absorb that $20 into daily life without even noticing. A slightly nicer lunch, an app subscription you forgot you were paying for gets renewed without a second thought because, hey, there's room. That $20 evaporates so quietly you couldn't tell someone where it went if they asked you an hour later. But the person building toward their first $100 does something different with that same $20. They move it, not because $20 is going to change their life. It won't. They move it because moving it is the whole point. They're not funding an emergency fund yet. They're rehearsing a version of themselves who funds an emergency fund. This is why I think the obsession with big milestones actually hurts more people than it helps. When your only measuring stick is $10,000, every small deposit feels pathetic by comparison. You put in $50 and your brain says, congratulations, you're now 0.5% of the way to a number that still feels impossibly far away. That's demoralizing. Nobody sticks with a habit that constantly reminds them how far they have left to go. But if your measuring stick is $100, that same $50 deposit means you're halfway there. Halfway feels completely different from 0.5%. It feels achievable, and achievable is what actually sustains behavior over time. There's a term for what happens once someone crosses that first $100 threshold, and it comes up constantly in behavioral finance research. It's called the fresh start effect. People are far more likely to pursue a goal and stick with it right after they've had some kind of clean beginning, a new month, a birthday, a first successful attempt at something. Your first $100 saved functions as exactly that kind of fresh start. It's proof, tangible and checkable, that the version of you who saves money actually exists now, not as an aspiration, as a fact you can log into your banking app and verify. Compare that to what happens on the way to $10,000. By the time you're sitting at 7 or 8,000, saving isn't really proving anything new to you. You already know you're capable of it. You're just executing, which is valuable, don't get me wrong, but it's a completely different psychological experience than that first $100, where every dollar is a small referendum on whether this whole saving thing is actually going to stick. Here's a comparison that might make this land harder. Imagine two people. The first person inherits $10,000 from a relative and drops it straight into a savings account. The second person spends 8 months scraping together their first $100, 20 here, 35 there, occasionally going backwards when life throws a curveball, but eventually landing on $100 saved through nothing but their own repeated decisions. On paper, the first person is 100 times richer. In terms of actual financial trajectory, the second person is almost certainly going to end up wealthier over the next 20 years. Because the first person has money, the second person has a system, and systems compound. Piles of money that showed up without effort usually don't because there was never an underlying habit built to protect and grow it. This actually shows up in real data, not just in a nice story I'm telling you. Studies on lottery winners and inheritance recipients consistently find that a huge share of sudden windfalls disappear within a few years, sometimes leaving people in worse financial shape than before they got the money. Meanwhile, people who build wealth slowly through small, consistent habits are dramatically more likely to hold on to it and grow it over time. The dollar amount at the starting line tells you almost nothing about where someone ends up. The habit does all the predicting. So let's talk about what actually happens in your head during that stretch toward your first $100, because it's more interesting than people give it credit for. The first time you choose not to spend $20 so you can save it instead, you feel it. It's uncomfortable. Like there's a small, nagging sense of missing out, even on something as forgettable as a mediocre lunch. But here's the thing about discomfort that's chosen on purpose. Instead of forced on you by circumstance, it builds something every single time you make that choice. You're laying down a tiny bit of evidence that you're someone who can delay a want in favor of a plan. By the time you hit $100, you've probably made that choice 10 or 15 separate times. 10 or 15 small proofs that you follow through on what you say you're going to do. Compare that to someone who just gets handed $10,000 with no effort behind it. They have the number, sure, but they don't have those 10 or 15 proofs. They haven't built the muscle. And when life inevitably tests that muscle, a tempting purchase, a rough month, a friend pushing them to spend on something they don't need, the person without the reps is far more likely to fold because the identity of being a saver was never actually installed. It was just a balance sitting in an account, disconnected from any real behavior. Now, I want to address something that probably crossed your mind already, where $100 doesn't cover an emergency. It's not going to fix a car, and it's definitely not going to replace a lost paycheck. That's true, and it's important to say clearly. This isn't a video telling you that $100 is financially significant in the way that, say, an emergency fund is significant. It's not. What I'm telling you is that it's psychologically significant in a way that dwarfs its dollar value, and that psychological shift is the actual engine behind every bigger number that comes after it. Here's a way to think about it that might make the distinction clearer. The $10,000 protects you from disaster. The first $100 protects you from yourself. And weirdly, the second one has to happen before the first one ever does because the version of you who's careless with $100 is not the version of you who's going to consistently and patiently build 10,000. Let's talk about what happens once that first $100 is sitting there and you're deciding what to do next, because this is where a lot of people quietly go wrong. Some people hit their first $100, feel a little proud of themselves, and then treat it like a finish line instead of a starting gun. They spend it on something nice, tell themselves they'll start again later, and later somehow never comes. If that's you, I want to be honest instead of encouraging in a fake way. That $100 was never really about the $100. It was about proving the habit works. Spending it the moment it appears undoes the exact thing that made it valuable in the first place, which is continuity. The habit only compounds if you let it keep running. The people who actually turn that first 100 into real wealth do something almost boring with it. They don't spend it and they don't stare at it either. They basically ignore it and immediately start working on the next 100. That's it. No celebration lap, no dramatic reinvention of their budget, just a quiet continuation of the exact same small decision that got them there in the first place. And here's the part that should genuinely excite you. The second $100 is almost always faster than the first, not because of interest, the amount is too small for compounding to matter yet, but because the internal resistance is lower. You already proved to yourself you can do this. You're not fighting the same uphill identity battle a second time, you're just repeating something you already know works. This is where the real snowball starts, and it has nothing to do with money multiplying itself yet. It's you multiplying your own consistency. First 100, then the next 100 feels a little more natural. Then you're not tracking every dollar with white-knuckled intensity anymore, because the behavior has started to become automatic instead of effortful. That's the actual bridge between $100 and $10,000. Not some clever investment trick, just the same tiny decision, made enough times in a row that it stops requiring willpower and starts requiring almost nothing at all. I want to bring this back to something a little uncomfortable because I think it's worth sitting with. On a lot of people who are currently sitting at $0 saved, look at the $10,000 milestone and feel almost paralyzed by the distance. It feels so far away that starting seems pointless. Why bother with $50 when the actual goal is 20,000 times bigger than that? But that thinking has the entire process backwards. Yeah, and you're not supposed to feel the size of the $10,000 goal while you're working on your first 100. If you did, saving would feel miserable and nobody would stick with it. And the entire design of starting small is that it lets you feel proportionate progress instead of getting crushed by a number that's still months or years away. There's also something worth saying about how differently your brain treats a completed goal versus an ongoing one. When you hit exactly $100, your brain registers that as a finished thing, a closed loop. And closed loops feel good in a way that partial progress toward a much bigger number simply doesn't. You don't get that same rewarding click at $7,300 on the way to 10,000. It just feels like a number that's still not the number you wanted, but $100 once you hit it is complete. That completion is what makes it worth celebrating internally, quietly, without needing anyone else to know about it. Let's talk about who actually benefits most from thinking this way, because it's not just people starting from zero. Even if you already have money saved, even if you're the person with $10 or $20,000 sitting in an account right now, going back to this idea matters every time you're trying to build a new financial habit. Starting an investment account for the first time, building a fund for a specific goal, saving towards something that feels intimidating in its full size. The move is always the same. Find your version of the first $100. Make it small enough that saying no to it would feel a little silly. Then repeat it until it's boring. Boring is the goal. Boring means the identity has taken hold and stopped requiring conscious effort. I think this is really the quiet secret behind almost everyone who ends up financially comfortable without ever having some dramatic financial breakthrough. It was never one big decision. It was never a windfall or a genius investment they made at exactly the right time. It was $100 handled correctly, followed by another $100, followed by another, until the habit was so deeply installed that hitting 10,000 almost felt inevitable by comparison. So if you're sitting there right now with a bank account that makes you wince a little when you open the app, I want you to stop measuring yourself against $10,000 for a minute. Just for a minute, find $100. It doesn't have to happen today, and it doesn't have to happen in one deposit. Let it take a few weeks, let it take a few months if that's what it takes. What matters isn't the speed. What matters is that somewhere in the middle of that process, almost without noticing, you become someone who saves money. And once that happens, the $10,000 stops being a mountain you're staring up at from the bottom and starts being something that's simply next.